2 Chronicles 10 through 12. Well, as we bounce back and forth now between the record of Kings and Chronicles, let's talk about how they compare. First, you'll notice that they often are extremely parallel, and it's almost like they're copying each other or a third source. The only way to really follow along on that level would be to get something like a synoptic harmony of the Kings and Chronicles. I use it quite a bit in figuring or in watching how the records are displayed in these two books. And again, they often, it looks like there must have been a written record that they're either sharing or that the chronicler is using Kings. That's the second thing we should notice, that Chronicles is a later record from what we can tell. It's kind of like a best of, or a series of selected sermons, even some people think, as to why it records what it does, because it seems to be more selective than Kings. If you want to read about a northern king, one of the kings of the northern 10 tribes, Israel, as we call them, that will only be in Kings. Chronicles will only give the record of the southern monarchy as we get going. It's interesting, some of the names that are used, and there's many of these. This is in 2 Chronicles 9. It says this, that the records he was using was the history of Nathan, or the prophecy of Ahijah, or the visions of Iddo. So these are all books that we've lost. Anything that's not in our canon, we do not have. So they must have been using many written records, and sometimes it looks as though Chronicles literally is copying Kings. When telling the story of the southern kingdom, let's talk about this, because it does seem, and again, here comes some judgment calls as to why the record of Chronicles seems to be very selective, or at least sometimes, and here's where we don't know why he necessarily records or leaves out what he does. I've got a story in my family background. My great-great-grandfather on my mother's side, this is back in the 1800s. He was fresh off the boat from Sweden and living up in Mora, Minnesota, and one night he left the tavern in the town and was very drunk, and he decided to walk home. He never made it. They found him the next day in a snowbank, frozen solid. Well, is that part of my family history? Yes. Would it be included in my family biography? It depends on who's writing it, right? And the idea of snipping out or selectively leaving out ideas is part of understanding how the Chronicles sound. Let me give you a couple examples. They are fascinating to me. In 2 Samuel, chapter 11, verse 1, down to chapter 12, verse 26, we have a story. It is completely missing from the record of Chronicles. And again, if you were reading along, they are sounding word for word until you get to 2 Samuel 11, and all the way down. This is two chapters of material. And what happens in the story of Chronicles is, and this is in 1 Chronicles 20, verse 1, and then 21b. It's literally in the same verse. You jump from this verse here to this verse here. In other words, two chapters of material are in 1 King, or in the Samuel record, that is obviously, it's almost like an X-Acto knife. This person cut that material out. Interestingly, it is the Bathsheba story. Now, of course, everyone knows about the Bathsheba story in the life of David. It would be like taking Watergate out of the Nixon Museum, which, by the way, I was there once, and Watergate is found at the very end as you're about to walk out. The last display case has the mention of Watergate. Well, that's part of the history, right, of the Nixon presidency. But if you're trying to present a good rendition of the Nixon story, well, you'll kind of put it at the end. And interestingly, the chronicler completely leaves out the story of Bathsheba, even though everyone would have known it. One other illustration, it's in 1 Kings 10, verse 29, and we just finished this. down to chapter 11, verse 41. It's literally a whole chapter and some more. One whole chapter of material. And when you are reading along, again, almost word for word in the Chronicles account, and you come to 1 Chronicles 9:28 and then 9:29, clearly this section, it's an entire chapter, has been omitted, and it literally is gone. And interestingly, this is the other gods story of Solomon, where he had 700 wives and 300 concubines, and they turned his heart. So again, it's just interesting as you're reading the Chronicles, if this is all you had, you would not have known that David ever fell into adultery with Bathsheba and killed Uriah. You would never have known that Solomon gave his life to other gods of other nations. But now here's the other thing. Some things are included in the story that are not in Kings. And let me give you this example. It's in 2 Chronicles 26, or 2 Chronicles 12, verses 5 through 14. 2 Chronicles 12, 5 to 14, where God says, "Because you have forsaken me, Rehoboam, I will forsake you." That is going to be, again, this looking ahead idea. I want to mention it because we're always wondering if something is said in the biblical story, does it ever get picked up again? Listen to two other passages. 2 Chronicles 24:20, this is not in Kings. This is said to Joash, "Why do you transgress the commandments of the Lord so that you cannot prosper? Because you have forsaken the Lord, he has also forsaken you." We'll also hear the echo of this going all the way down into the New Testament story. 2 Timothy 2:12, "If we deny him, he will also deny us."